Hello to everyone who is looking for a thrill. Welcome to our channel, where we share the most creepy and real stories that make your skin crawl. Today we dive into the story of an abandoned camp where people disappeared under mysterious circumstances. What really happened in this sinister place? Let's figure out this dark secret together. The story begins in a quiet suburb in the southeastern United States. The small town, surrounded by dense forests, has always seemed like a calm and cozy place to live. This peace was deceptive. The town hid dark secrets that the inhabitants tried to forget, which reminded them of themselves in silence. Michael was one of those children who had been bypassed by life since birth. His mother died in childbirth, and his father, overwhelmed by grief, soon committed suicide. Michael was left alone in this world, not knowing the love and warmth children usually receive from their parents. He was transferred to an orphanage, where he spent most of his childhood. The orphanage was a place where children learned to survive, not to live. The abandoned building with its cold gray walls, eternally damp from humidity, was saturated with a sense of hopelessness. From the very beginning, Michael was different from other children. He was quiet, withdrawn, and could often be found in the corner of a room, alone, reading an old book or drawing on tattered paper. Other children teased him, considering him strange, and the teachers ignored him, considering him a useless case. But Michael wasn't mad at them. He knew that his life would not be like the others. When Michael turned 16, Emily came into his life. She was a new teacher who had recently arrived in the city and got a job at the orphanage. Emily was young, full of enthusiasm, and dreamed of making the world a better place. Her kindness and concern immediately caught Michael's attention. She was the first to notice him, the first to speak to him as an equal, and not as another abandoned child. Gradually, a special bond emerged between them. For the first time, Michael felt that someone could love him, and hope began to arise in his heart. Emily also noticed that Michael was special. She saw in his eyes the pain and loneliness that he hid from everyone. She began spending more time with him, reading books to him, telling him about the world outside the orphanage, where people could live happily, love, and be loved. Michael eagerly absorbed her stories, dreaming that one day he too would be able to leave this cursed place and start a new life. Michael became more and more attached to Emily every day. She became for him not just a teacher, but a ray of light in his dark, old life. She taught him what it means to trust, to open up, and to feel. For the first time in his life, Michael began to dream. He dreamed of how they would leave this terrible orphanage together, how they would travel the world, how they would live free from the past that haunted him every day. However, as is often the case in life, happiness cannot last forever. Rumors about the too close relationship between the teacher and the orphan began to spread throughout the orphanage. At first, it was just whispers behind his back, but soon these rumors reached the leadership of the shelter. Emily was called into a conversation where she was clearly told that she had to stay away from Michael. She was threatened with dismissal if she did not end her unacceptable relationship with a pupil. Emily was shocked and deeply hurt by such accusation. She knew that her feelings for Michael were pure, but she also understood that if she continued, she risked losing her job and the opportunity to help other children. She didn't know how to tell Michael that their meetings had to stop. One warm summer night, they met in an abandoned corner of the orphanage, where no one usually went. Emily tried to explain to him that they could no longer see each other as often as they used to. Michael didn't understand why they wanted to separate them. It seemed unfair and cruel to him. The darkness that he had been holding back for so long began to form in his heart. He felt betrayed and abandoned again. First his mother died, then his father, and now the only person who showed him even a drop of love is leaving him. Emily, seeing the suffering on Michael's face, wanted to comfort him. She hugged him, feeling his body tremble with suppressed anger and pain. But the moment she hugged him, she realized that he was no longer the boy she had met a few months ago. It was a teenager consumed by despair, and she was scared. The thought flashed through her mind that she had made a mistake in allowing Michael to become so close. Michael felt her fear, and this feeling increased his own suffering even more. A whirlwind of thoughts began in his head. All his dreams began to crumble. He was alone again, and this fear, which he had been trying to suppress for so long, flared up with renewed vigor. He abruptly pulled away from Emily and ran into the darkness of the night. Emily tried to catch up with him, shouting his name, but Michael wasn't listening. He ran as fast as he could, trying to escape the pain that was tearing him apart from the inside. Michael didn't show up for breakfast the next day. Emily was worried, but she wasn't allowed to look for him. She was strictly ordered to stay away from him. Several days have passed, and no one has seen Michael. Emily couldn't find her place. She knew she had hurt him. She didn't know how to fix it. As time passed, rumors began to circulate in the orphanage that Michael had run away. Caregivers did not attach much importance to this, believing that he would simply return in a couple of days, as had happened before with other children. But time passed and Michael did not return. Emily felt guilty about what had happened, and every night she had nightmares in which Michael was alone in the woods, scared and cold. She knew she had to do something, but she couldn't break the rules, otherwise she would have lost everything. However, after a few weeks, when the search did not yield any results, and the police stopped actively searching for the missing teenager, Emily decided to act. One cold night, she dressed warmly and went to the forest surrounding the shelter. She knew that Michael loved solitude, and perhaps he found shelter in one of the abandoned houses in the woods, where children sometimes hid playing hide and seek. Emily was walking through a dense forest, lighting her way with a flashlight, when she suddenly heard a rustle somewhere nearby. She froze, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Her heart began to beat faster. She knew she shouldn't be here, alone in the night, but the desire to find Michael was stronger than fear. Step by step, she moved on until she came across a small abandoned hut, which the children sometimes called the ghost house. She went to the door and slowly opened it. It was dark and damp inside, but Emily immediately saw that someone had been here recently. There was a sleeping bag on the floor, and next to it was a pack of food that they gave out at the shelter. Emily knew it was Michael. She whispered his name softly, hoping he would respond, but there was no response. Emily started looking for him in the cabin, but Michael was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, she heard a slight creaking sound behind her. She turned around and saw Michael standing in the doorway. His face was covered with dirt, and his eyes were full of pain and despair. "Why are you here?" "What is it?" he asked softly. Emily walked slowly over to him, trying to find the words to explain what had happened. But Michael didn't let her say a word. He came closer, his eyes filled with hatred and anger. Emily realized that this Michael was no longer the boy she knew. "You promised to be there for me," he whispered. His voice was full of pain. "But you betrayed me, just like everyone else." Emily felt her heart clench with pain. She knew she had hurt him, but she couldn't believe it had brought him to this state. She tried to hug him, but Michael abruptly pushed her away. His face was contorted with anger, and Emily realized that he wasn't going to forgive her. "You don't understand what I've been through," he shouted. "You were my only hope, but you abandoned me." Emily stood there in horror, not knowing what to do. Michael continued to approach, and hatred shone in his eyes. She realized she had to leave, but her feet felt like they were chained to the floor. He couldn't move. Emily stood in a daze, looking into the eyes of the boy she once considered her family. His anger was so intense that it seemed to penetrate her to the bone. Michael, the very boy she had tried to protect and loved so much, now stood in front of her, full of hatred and pain. She took a step forward, trying to calm him down, but Michael only stepped back, his eyes glistening with tears and despair. "Michael, I'm sorry," she whispered, feeling her own heart break. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted to protect you. I couldn't lose this job. I couldn't lose you." Michael looked at her, his lips trembling, as if he was trying to say something. The words stuck in his throat. Emily could see his pain and anger fighting inside him, and she couldn't help but notice how much he had changed in the short time they hadn't seen each other. He became hard, cold, almost alien. She didn't recognize him as the boy who had once brought her flowers and laughed at her jokes. "You were everything to me," Michael finally whispered, his voice full of pain and disappointment. But now I realized that I can't trust anyone anymore. Everyone abandons me. Everyone betrays." Those words hit Emily in the heart. She felt tears running down her cheeks, and she knew she had lost Michael forever. She slowly walked up to him and, not knowing what else to do, hugged him, feeling his body tremble with suppressed anger and pain. But Michael remained cold. He did not respond to her embrace, did not push her away, but did not bring her closer to him either. He just stood there, letting her hug him, but his eyes were empty. Emily knew he couldn't forgive her anymore. She hugged him even tighter, trying to hold at least a shadow of the boy she once knew. But he remained a stranger. His soul was too badly wounded to go back. "I love you," she whispered in his ear, hoping that these words would warm his heart a little. But Michael was silent. He just stared at one point. His eyes were glassy, as if he was no longer here in this hut. Emily stepped back, feeling her strength drain from her. She couldn't fight anymore, couldn't convince him that everything would be okay anymore. Michael had already left, and she knew there was nothing she could do to bring him back now. She looked at him once more, hoping to see at least a glimmer of warmth in his eyes, but all she saw was a cold emptiness. Emily slowly walked out of the hut. Her heart was broken into 1,000 pieces. She knew she had lost Michael forever, and the thought was destroying her from the inside out. When she returned to the shelter, she was greeted by an oppressive silence. She felt the world crumbling around her, and she couldn't hold on to it anymore. Her life had lost its meaning without Michael, and she didn't know how to move on. Her colleagues noticed that she became sullen, withdrawn, and hardly talked to anyone. But no one dared to ask her what had happened. Everyone knew that Emily and Michael were close, but no one wanted to interfere. Weeks, months have passed. Michael never returned to the orphanage. The police stopped looking for him, believing that he may have fled far away and is now living on the streets. Emily waited every day for at least some news about him. But there was no news. She continued to work at the shelter, but her heart was no longer there. She felt dead inside, as if her soul had gone with Michael. One evening, when Emily was returning home after work, she noticed a small envelope on the doorstep of her apartment. She picked it up, tore open the envelope with trembling hands, and pulled out a photograph. Michael was in the picture, but now he was an adult. His face was hard and unreadable. He stood surrounded by strangers, and his eyes no longer shone with the kindness she had once known. There was only one word on the back of the photo: goodbye. Emily felt her heart stop. She knew what that meant. Michael had found his way, but that road no longer led to her. She realized that she would never see him again. She had lost him forever. The thought was so painful that Emily fell to her knees, clutching the photo in her hands. She felt her life crumbling, her dreams of a happy future with Michael falling apart. Her love, her hopes, everything she once built is now gone. Years have passed. Emily has never been able to recover from the loss. She tried to start a new life, met other people, but no one could replace Michael. His face haunted her nightmares. His words about betrayal resonated in her head every day. She couldn't love anymore, couldn't trust anymore. One rainy day, sitting at the window of her small house, Emily looked again at the very photo that she could not throw away. Her heart was heavy, and she knew she would never be able to forget Michael. He had left a deep scar in her soul that would never heal. She realized that her life was over the moment Michael left. She could no longer live on knowing that she had lost him forever. Emily got up from her chair, went to the window, and looked out at the gray sky, realizing that now she had no reason to continue living.